The morning sun cast long shadows across the dusty yard of the Colorado Territory Children's Home. As Ezra Blackwood limped slowly between the rows of boys lined up for inspection, his weathered hands, gnarled from 60 years of ranch work, moved methodically from one child to the next, checking for signs of strength, health, and the kind of determination that would be needed to survive on a working cattle ranch. It was September 1887, and Ezra had made this journey into Denver with a heavy heart and a practical need. His arthritis was worsening with each harsh winter. His back ached from decades of lifting hay bales and wrestling cattle, and his small ranch in the high country desperately needed strong hands to keep it running. At his age, hiring experienced cowboys was beyond his limited budget, but the territorial authorities had assured him that taking on an orphan boy as an indentured worker would solve both his labor shortage and provide a home for a child who needed one. "These are our strongest boys," announced Mrs. Helena Wickham, the stern matron who ran the institution with military precision. "All between the ages of 12 and 16, all healthy and accustomed to hard physical labor." Ezra nodded absently as he studied the faces before him. Most of the boys stood straight and tried to look capable, understanding that this inspection might determine their future. He saw the usual mixture of hope and resignation that marked children who had learned not to expect too much from life. "This is Robert Hayes," Mrs. Wickham continued, stopping beside a sturdy boy of 14 with broad shoulders and calloused hands. "Excellent with animals, never complains about difficult work. He'd be perfect for ranch duties." Ezra looked into Robert's eyes and saw competence and reliability, but also a hardness that suggested the boy had already decided that survival meant looking out for himself first. It was an understandable attitude for an orphan, but not necessarily what Ezra was looking for. "And this is William Crawford," the matron said, moving to a slightly older boy with the lean build of someone accustomed to manual labor. 16 years old, experienced with farm equipment. Very dependable. Again, Ezra saw capability, but also a certain deadness behind the eyes, the look of someone who had given up on dreams and settled for mere existence. These boys would work hard because they had to, but they wouldn't bring passion or innovation to the task. As they moved down the line, Ezra noticed a commotion at the far end of the yard, where a smaller group of children was gathered. A boy who appeared to be about 13 was demonstrating something with a piece of rope, his animated gestures and obvious enthusiasm drawing the attention of several younger children, who watched with fascination. "What's happening over there?" Ezra asked, nodding toward the group. Mrs. Wickham's expression soured immediately. "That's nothing you need to concern yourself with, Mr. Blackwood. That's Timothy Walsh, one of our special cases. He wouldn't be suitable for the kind of work you have in mind." But Ezra was already walking toward the group, his curiosity piqued by the sight of a child who still showed genuine enthusiasm about anything. As he approached, he could hear the boy explaining some kind of knot-tying technique to his audience. "You see, if you loop it this way, and then bring the loose end through here," Timothy was saying, his voice clear and confident, "you get a knot that holds firm under pressure, but releases easily when you need it to. Cowboys use this for securing loads that might need to be freed quickly." Ezra stopped short, impressed despite himself. The knot the boy was demonstrating was indeed a specialized technique used by experienced cattlemen, not something typically taught in orphanages. Timothy looked up as Ezra approached, and the rancher got his first clear look at the boy's face. Intelligent green eyes dominated features that were still soft with youth, and there was an alertness there that spoke of a mind constantly working, constantly learning. But as Timothy stood to greet the visitor, Ezra also noticed what Mrs. Wickham had been trying to hide. The boy's left leg was noticeably shorter than his right, causing him to walk with a pronounced limp. "Good morning, sir," Timothy said politely, his slight Irish accent suggesting recent immigrant parentage. "I'm Timothy Walsh. Are you here looking for help with ranch work?" Before Ezra could answer, Mrs. Wickham had bustled over to interrupt the conversation. "Mr. Blackwood, I really must insist that we return to viewing suitable candidates. Timothy is not available for the kind of placement you're seeking." "Why not?" Ezra asked directly. his attention still focused on the boy who had been teaching advanced rope work to other children. Mrs. Wickham's discomfort was obvious. Well, as you can see, Timothy has a physical limitation that would make ranch work impossible. He was born with a shortened leg, and while he gets around adequately enough for light duties here at the home, he certainly couldn't handle the demands of cattle work or heavy labor. Timothy's face flushed with embarrassment and anger, but his voice remained steady as he responded, "I may walk differently than others, ma'am, but my hands work fine, my mind works fine, and I'm not afraid of hard work." Ezra studied the boy more carefully, noting the strength in his shoulders and arms, the calluses on his hands that suggested he had indeed been doing physical labor. Despite his disability, more importantly, he saw a spark of determination and pride that was entirely absent from the supposedly more suitable candidates. "Where did you learn about rope work and cattle handling?" Ezra asked Timothy directly. The boy's face lit up with enthusiasm. "I read everything I can find about ranching and cowboys. The territorial library has books about animal husbandry, land management, even veterinary medicine. I've studied them all because I want to understand how things work." Mrs. Wickham's frustration was evident. Reading books is hardly the same as actual experience. "Timothy, Mr. Blackwood needs someone who can do real work, not someone who thinks he knows about work from reading about it." But Ezra was beginning to see something in Timothy that intrigued him far more than simple physical strength. Here was a boy who had taught himself skills despite having no practical opportunity to use them, who had maintained his enthusiasm for learning despite being told repeatedly that his dreams were impossible. "What else have you learned from your reading?" Ezra asked, ignoring Mrs. Wickham's obvious disapproval. Timothy's response revealed the depth of his self-education. He spoke knowledgeably about cattle breeding, discussed the challenges of high-altitude ranching, and demonstrated an understanding of seasonal grazing patterns that impressed even Ezra's experienced perspective. This wasn't the superficial knowledge of someone who had memorized facts, but the deep comprehension of someone who had truly studied and thought about complex problems. "Timothy has always been an exceptional student," Mrs. Wickham admitted reluctantly. "But intelligence alone doesn't qualify someone for physical labor, especially someone with his limitations." Ezra looked at the boy's eager face, then at the other candidates who were still standing in formation, waiting to be chosen. The contrast was stark: boys with strong bodies, but resigned spirits versus a boy with physical challenges, but an unquenchable fire for learning and growth. "How old are you, Timothy?" Ezra asked. 13, sir. I'll be 14 in November. And you're really interested in ranch work, not just as a job, but as something you'd wanted to build your life around. Timothy's response came without hesitation. "More than anything else in the world, sir. I know I can't do everything the same way others might, but I believe I can find ways to contribute. I'm willing to work twice as hard as anyone else to prove that I belong." Mrs. Wickham made one last attempt to dissuade Ezra from what she clearly considered a misguided decision. "Mr. Blackwood, I must advise against this choice. The other boys I showed you are proven workers with the physical capabilities your ranch requires. Timothy, while certainly intelligent, would be a liability in any situation requiring real labor." Ezra looked once more at Timothy's face, seeing past the physical imperfection to the determination and intelligence that burned beneath the surface. He thought about his own ranch, struggling not just from lack of labor, but from lack of innovation and fresh thinking. Perhaps what he needed wasn't just strong backs, but a sharp mind willing to find new solutions to old problems. "I'll take the boy," Ezra announced, his decision made. Timothy's expression transformed from hopeful anticipation to pure joy, while Mrs. Wickham looked as though she had just witnessed an act of supreme foolishness. "Sir, I really must insist that you reconsider." The matron tried one more time. "The liability issues alone, Mum," Ezra interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to making final decisions. "I've been ranching for 40 years, and I've learned to judge character as well as physical capability. This boy has something the others don't: the desire to prove himself, and the intelligence to find ways around obstacles." As they completed the paperwork for Timothy's indenture, Ezra found himself answering the boy's endless stream of questions about ranch life, cattle management, and the challenges of high-altitude agriculture. Timothy's enthusiasm was infectious, reminding Ezra of his own early days when every aspect of ranch work had seemed like an adventure waiting to happen. The wagon ride to Ezra's ranch took them through some of the most beautiful country in Colorado Territory, climbing steadily into the foothills where aspen trees blazed gold in the autumn sunlight and snow-capped peaks promised the harsh winter that was only weeks away. "It's incredible," Timothy breathed, his eyes wide as he took in the vastness of the landscape. "I've never seen country like this." Ezra felt an unexpected surge of pride as he watched the boy's reaction to his homeland. "It's not easy country," he warned. "Winters can kill you if you're not prepared, and the altitude takes getting used to. But there's nowhere else I'd rather be." As they crested the final ridge before Ezra's property, the ranch came into view, a modest log house with a stone chimney, a large barn that had seen better days, and several corrals surrounded by pastures, where a small herd of cattle grazed contentedly. It wasn't impressive by the standards of the large operations in the lower country, but it represented 30 years of hard work and careful planning. "How many head do you run?" Timothy asked, his practiced eye already assessing the livestock visible from their vantage point. "About 200 breeding cows, plus their calves and a dozen bulls," Ezra replied, pleased that the boy knew enough to ask intelligent questions. "It's not a big operation, but it's been enough to make a living." Timothy was quiet for a moment, his sharp mind clearly working through calculations. "That's actually a good size for high-country ranching. Large enough to be efficient, small enough to manage the herd intensively during harsh weather." Ezra looked at the boy with new respect. That kind of strategic thinking wasn't something you learned from books alone. It required the ability to synthesize information and apply it to real situations. As they pulled into the ranch yard, Ezra felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension about the decision he had made. Taking on Timothy Walsh represented a gamble that could either prove to be the smartest move of his career or a costly mistake that would burden his operation with a worker who couldn't pull his weight. But as he watched Timothy's face light up with wonder as they approached the barn, Ezra felt confident that his instincts had been right. This wasn't just a boy looking for shelter and food. This was someone who had found his calling and was ready to dedicate his life to mastering it. Physical limitations notwithstanding. That evening, as they sat by the fire after a simple supper, Timothy asked the question that had been weighing on both their minds since leaving the orphanage. "Mr. Blackwood, I know Mrs. Wickham thinks you made a mistake choosing me. I want you to know that I understand I'll have to work harder than anyone else to prove I deserve to be here." Ezra studied the boy's earnest face in the firelight, seeing both determination and vulnerability in those intelligent green eyes. "Son, I didn't choose you despite your limitations. I chose you because you're the only one in that whole place who still believed in possibilities, instead of just accepting limitations." As Timothy prepared for bed in the small room Ezra had prepared for him, both man and boy understood that they were embarking on a partnership that would test them both. Neither could have imagined that within a few years, the lame orphan who supposedly couldn't work would not only prove his worth, but would become the salvation of everything Ezra had built. The first Colorado winter tested Timothy Walsh in ways that no amount of reading could have prepared him for. By November, snow lay 3 feet deep across Ezra's ranch, and the temperature regularly dropped to 20 below zero. The physical demands of feeding cattle in such conditions would have challenged even the strongest ranch hands, but Timothy attacked each task with a combination of determination and innovation that amazed his mentor. "Most folks would say that leg of yours makes you unsuited for this work," Ezra observed one morning as he watched Timothy devise a system of ropes and pulleys to help him move hay bales despite his mobility limitations. "But you've figured out ways to work smarter instead of just harder." Timothy paused in his work, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. "My father used to say that every problem has a solution, if you're willing to think about it differently. Just because I can't do things the usual way doesn't mean I can't do them at all." It was one of the few times Timothy had mentioned his parents, and Ezra noted the quiet pride in the boy's voice when he spoke of his father's philosophy. The Walshes had died in a tenement fire in Denver when Timothy was 10, leaving him with nothing but his intelligence and an unshakable belief that obstacles were meant to be overcome rather than surrendered to. The spring of 1888 brought new challenges and opportunities for Timothy to prove his worth. Calving season arrived with its usual combination of joy and crisis. As new life struggled to establish itself in the harsh mountain environment, Timothy's keen observation skills and intuitive understanding of animal behavior made him invaluable. During this critical time, "That cow over there," Timothy pointed toward a heifer standing apart from the main herd. "She's been restless for the past hour, pawing at the ground and looking back at her flanks. I think she's getting ready to drop her calf." Ezra followed the boy's gaze and saw what Timothy had noticed, subtle signs of impending labor that even experienced cattlemen sometimes missed. "Good eye, son. Let's get her into the calving pen before she has problems out here in the open." The next few hours demonstrated Timothy's growing expertise as he assisted with a difficult birth, his small hands and gentle manner helping to guide a breeched calf into the world safely. Ezra watched with growing admiration as the boy worked with complete focus and surprising skill. "Where did you learn to handle calving problems?" Ezra asked as they cleaned up after successfully delivering the healthy calf. Timothy's face flushed with embarrassment. "I practiced on the barn cats back at the orphanage when they had kittens. Mrs. Wickham would have been furious if she'd known, but I figured the principles would be similar for larger animals." The admission revealed both Timothy's resourcefulness and his absolute dedication to preparing himself for ranch work, even when his opportunities for practical experience were severely limited. By his second summer on the ranch, Timothy had become indispensable in ways that went far beyond physical labor. His analytical mind had identified inefficiencies in their operations and developed solutions that saved both time and money. He had reorganized the barn layout to make feeding more efficient, designed a new water delivery system that reduced waste, and even suggested changes to their breeding program that promised to improve the quality of future calves. "You know," Ezra said one evening as they reviewed the ranch's financial records, "when I took you on, I thought I was getting a hired hand who might eventually earn his keep. Instead, I got a partner who's helping me build something better than I ever managed on my own." The compliment meant more to Timothy than any amount of money could have. For the first time since his parents' death, he felt truly valued for who he was rather than pitied for what he couldn't do. The validation of Timothy's worth came in an unexpected way. During his third year on the ranch, a severe drought had stressed cattle operations throughout the region, and many ranchers were struggling to keep their herds alive as water sources dried up and grazing became scarce. Timothy's extensive reading about range management and water conservation had given him knowledge that proved crucial during the crisis. He identified alternative water sources that other ranchers had overlooked, developed rationing systems that stretched their feed supplies, and even negotiated agreements with neighboring operations to share resources during the emergency. "That boy of yours has saved half the ranches in this valley," Dr. Frank Morrison, the local veterinarian and informal leader of the ranching community, told Ezra during a meeting to coordinate drought response efforts. "His ideas about water management and feed conservation are keeping cattle alive that would have died otherwise." The recognition from respected members of the community marked a turning point in how Timothy was perceived. No longer was he seen as Ezra's charity case or an experiment in misguided compassion. He had become a valued voice in local agricultural decisions, sought out for his innovative thinking and practical solutions to complex problems. But with recognition came new challenges. Word of Timothy's success had reached the ears of James Carrington, owner of the largest ranch in the valley, and a man who had built his empire by acquiring the properties of less successful neighbors. Carrington's visits to Ezra's ranch became more frequent, his interest in their operations improvements increasingly obvious. "I've been watching what you and your boy have accomplished here," Carrington said during one of his inspections, his eyes cataloging every enhancement Timothy had made to the property. "Very impressive innovations, the kind of thinking that could be applied on a much larger scale." Ezra felt a chill of concern at the land baron's obvious interest. Timothy's innovations work because they're tailored to our specific situation. Not every idea scales up successfully. Perhaps not, Carrington agreed smoothly. But the mind that created those ideas certainly could be applied to larger challenges. I'd be very interested in discussing employment opportunities for young Walsh. A talent like his shouldn't be wasted on a small operation. The offer was both a compliment and a threat. Carrington was known for acquiring the services of valuable employees by offering them opportunities their current employers couldn't match, then using their expertise to put their former bosses out of business. Timothy's response to Carrington's overtures was immediate and unwavering. "Mr. Carrington, I appreciate your interest, but this ranch is my home. Ezra gave me a chance when no one else would, and I intend to repay that loyalty with my own." The rejection didn't sit well with a man accustomed to getting what he wanted. Carrington's subsequent actions suggested that if he couldn't acquire Timothy's services, he would find other ways to benefit from the innovations being developed on the Blackwood Ranch. The discovery of surveyors on their property line came without warning. Timothy noticed them first, his sharp eyes spotting the unfamiliar activity from across a meadow where he was checking fence lines. "Ezra, we've got company," Timothy called out as he limped back to where his mentor was working. Surveyors with official-looking equipment, marking boundaries along our eastern border. Ezra's face darkened with understanding. "Carrington, he's challenging our property lines, probably claiming we've been grazing cattle on his land." The legal battle that followed tested everything Timothy had learned about standing up to powerful opponents. Carrington's lawyers argued that the Blackwood Ranch had been systematically encroaching on his property, using Timothy's innovations to make unauthorized improvements on land that didn't belong to them. "It's a classic land grab," Timothy told Ezra as they reviewed the legal documents. "He's using our own success against us, claiming that our improvements prove we knew we were working beyond our legitimate boundaries." But Timothy's analytical mind had also spotted the flaw in Carrington's strategy. The innovations he had developed were carefully documented, with detailed records of their implementation and the specific locations where they had been applied. More importantly, Timothy's methodical nature had led him to survey and map every improvement, creating a precise record of property boundaries that contradicted Carrington's claims. "Here's what we do," Timothy said, spreading his carefully maintained maps across their kitchen table. "We prove that every improvement we made was within our legal boundaries, and we show that Carrington's claims would actually put him in possession of land that belongs to other neighbors as well." The strategy worked brilliantly. Timothy's meticulous documentation not only proved their innocence, but exposed Carrington's pattern of fraudulent land acquisition throughout the valley. The legal victory established Timothy's reputation as more than just an innovative rancher. He had become a defender of property rights and honest business practices. "You saved more than just our ranch," Ezra told Timothy as they celebrated their court victory. "You saved the whole community from a man who thought he could steal what others had worked to build." Timothy's response revealed how much he had matured during his years on the ranch. "This community gave me a chance to prove myself when the rest of the world wrote me off as useless. Defending it isn't just the right thing to do, it's my responsibility." As Timothy's 18th birthday approached, both he and Ezra understood that their relationship was evolving from mentor and student to equal partners. The boy who had arrived as an indentured servant had become the driving force behind the ranch's continued success and improvement. "I've been thinking about the future," Ezra said one evening as they planned the next year's operations. "You've more than earned your freedom from indenture, and you've proven you can succeed anywhere you choose to go. The question is, what do you want to do with that freedom?" Timothy's answer came without hesitation. "I want to stay here and keep building what we've started, but I want to do it as your partner, not as your employee." The proposal represented a fundamental change in their relationship, but it also recognized the reality of how the ranch had been operating for the past year. Timothy's innovations and management decisions had become central to their success, and his reputation in the community had grown to equal Ezra's own. "Partners then," Ezra agreed, extending his hand. "Equal shares in the work, equal shares in the profits, equal say in the decisions." As they shook hands to seal their new partnership, Both men understood that they had created something remarkable, a relationship that had begun with society's cast-off, and an aging rancher had evolved into a collaboration that was transforming their corner of Colorado territory. How will Timothy and Ezra's partnership face the challenges ahead? What new threats will test their bond and their growing success? Subscribe to our channel to witness the incredible transformation of a boy the world said couldn't work into a force that changes everything around him. The autumn of 1891 brought devastating news that would test everything Timothy Walsh had built during his 4 years as Ezra Blackwood's partner. The old rancher, now 71 and increasingly frail from the arthritis that had plagued him for years, collapsed while checking fence lines on a crisp October morning. Dr. Morrison's examination revealed what they had all been dreading. Ezra's heart was failing, and he likely had only months to live. "I'm not afraid of dying," Ezra told Timothy as they sat on the porch watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. "What worries me is what happens to this place after I'm gone. We've built something special here, something worth preserving." Timothy felt his throat tighten with emotion as he absorbed the implications of his mentor's words. The ranch that had become his home, the community that had accepted him despite his physical limitations, the life they had built together, all of it was threatened by the simple reality that nothing lasts forever. "The ranch will survive," Timothy said with more confidence than he felt. "We've got good systems in place, solid finances, and the respect of our neighbors. Everything you've taught me will keep it going." But both men understood the challenges that lay ahead. Without Ezra's legal ownership and established reputation, Timothy would be vulnerable to the same kind of predatory behavior that James Carrington had attempted years earlier. As a former orphan with no family connections or significant wealth, he lacked the social standing that protected other ranchers from those who sought to exploit weakness. The solution, when it came, represented both Ezra's final gift to Timothy and his ultimate expression of faith in the young man's character and abilities. "I want you to have my name," Ezra announced one morning as they reviewed the ranch's financial records. "Legal adoption, even at your age. You've been more of a son to me than any blood relative could have been, and I want the world to know it." The adoption papers were filed in November, making Timothy Walsh officially Timothy Blackwood, heir to everything Ezra had built during his decades of hard work. But more than just a legal convenience, the name change represented the completion of Timothy's transformation from society's unwanted burden to the legitimate inheritor of a successful ranching operation. "You understand what this means?" Ezra asked as they signed the final documents. "You're not just taking on property and assets. You're taking on the responsibility of the Blackwood name and reputation." Timothy understood perfectly. The name he was inheriting carried weight in the community, representing integrity, innovation, and fair dealing that had been earned through 40 years of consistent character. Maintaining that reputation would require him to live up to standards that had been set long before he arrived. Ezra Blackwood died peacefully in his sleep on a snowy December morning, surrounded by neighbors who had come to pay their respects to a man who had helped build their community from nothing. Timothy, now 20 years old and bearing the Blackwood name, found himself responsible for not only the ranch's operations, but also for the funeral arrangements and the complex process of settling Ezra's estate. "He raised you well," Dr. Morrison said as the community gathered to honor Ezra's memory. "You've got his integrity and his vision, plus innovations he never could have imagined. This ranch is in good hands, but having good intentions and community support wasn't enough to protect Timothy from those who saw his youth and recent name change as opportunities for exploitation." Within weeks of Ezra's funeral, he found himself facing challenges from multiple directions. The first attack came from Ezra's distant relatives back east, cousins who had never visited the ranch but now claimed that the adoption had been invalid due to Ezra's failing health. Their lawyers argued that a man suffering from heart disease couldn't have made competent legal decisions, and they demanded that the estate be divided among Ezra's blood relatives rather than given to an adopted heir. "It's a typical vulture strategy," explained Samuel Richardson, the attorney Timothy had hired to defend his inheritance. They wait until the original owner is dead, then challenge any arrangements that don't benefit them. The fact that you've been running this ranch successfully for years doesn't matter to them. The legal battle consumed months and thousands of dollars that the ranch could ill afford. Timothy found himself spending more time in courtrooms than in cattle pastures, defending not just his right to inherit, but his very identity as Timothy Blackwood. The second challenge came from James Carrington, who had never forgotten his defeat at Timothy's hands years earlier. Now he saw an opportunity to acquire the Blackwood Ranch while its young owner was distracted by legal problems. "I'm prepared to make a generous offer for your property," Carrington announced during one of his uninvited visits. "Enough to pay your legal bills and leave you with a comfortable stake to start over somewhere else." Timothy's rejection was immediate and absolute. "This ranch isn't for sale at any price. It was Ezra's life work, and now it's mine." Carrington's smile was cold and predatory. "Young man, you're facing lawsuits that could drag on for years and cost more than this property is worth. Sometimes the wise course is to cut your losses and walk away while you still can." But Timothy had learned from Ezra that some things were worth fighting for regardless of the cost. The ranch represented more than just land and livestock. It was proof that society's cast-offs could achieve something meaningful if given the opportunity. The turning point came when Timothy discovered evidence that Carrington had been financing the Eastern relative's legal challenge, hoping to acquire the ranch cheaply once the inheritance battle had bankrupted its current owner. "Look at these financial records," Timothy told his lawyer, spreading documents across Richardson's desk. "Carrington's been paying the relative's legal fees through a dummy corporation. This isn't just a family dispute, it's a coordinated attempt at theft." The revelation transformed the case from a simple inheritance dispute into a criminal conspiracy investigation. When confronted with evidence of his manipulation, Carrington's Eastern allies quickly abandoned their legal challenge and disappeared back to their comfortable lives in Boston and New York. But the victory came at a tremendous cost. The legal fees had consumed most of the ranch's operating capital, and the months of distraction had prevented Timothy from making necessary preparations for the harsh winter. Cattle were underfed, equipment needed repairs, and the ranch's financial situation was precarious. "You've won the right to keep the ranch," Dr. Morrison observed during one of his visits, "but you may not have enough left to make it work." Timothy's response revealed how much he had learned from Ezra about perseverance and creative problem-solving. Instead of accepting defeat, he developed a comprehensive recovery plan that utilized every innovation he had developed over the years. He negotiated partnerships with neighboring ranchers to share resources and reduce costs. He implemented new efficiencies in cattle management that increased productivity while reducing expenses. Most importantly, he leveraged his reputation for innovation and integrity to secure credit from banks that had previously been reluctant to deal with such a young rancher. "What you've accomplished here is remarkable," the banker told Timothy as they reviewed the ranch's recovery projections. "Most operations would have collapsed under the pressure you've faced. Instead, you've found ways to emerge stronger than before." The spring of 1893 marked Timothy's complete vindication as the legitimate heir to Ezra Blackwood's legacy. The ranch was not only financially stable but expanding, with improvements and innovations that surpassed anything achieved during Ezra's lifetime. Community recognition of Timothy's success came in the form of election to the local Cattlemen's Association Board. Despite his being the youngest member by more than a decade, his voice in regional agricultural decisions carried the weight of proven results and hard-won respect. When Ezra first brought that lame boy home from the orphanage, Pete Wilson, one of the area's oldest ranchers, told the gathered association members, "Most of us figured the old man had lost his mind. Now that boy's running the most successful operation in the valley and teaching the rest of us how to do our jobs better." The comment, meant as a compliment, revealed how far Timothy had traveled from society's expectations of what was possible for someone with his background and limitations. He had not only overcome the disadvantage of his birth and physical condition, but had transformed them into sources of strength and innovation. As Timothy stood before the association meeting that evening, addressing fellow ranchers about water, management, and sustainable grazing practices. He embodied everything Ezra had hoped for when he made the controversial decision to take on an orphan boy who supposedly couldn't work. My mentor, Ezra Blackwood, taught me that success isn't measured by how much you start with, but by how much you build from what you're given, Timothy told the assembled ranchers. Every challenge we face is an opportunity to prove that limitations exist mainly in our own minds. After the meeting, as Timothy prepared for the long ride back to his ranch, Dr. Morrison approached with an observation that captured the magnitude of his transformation. "You know, Timothy, when you first arrived here, people said you were just Ezra's charity project. Now they're saying Ezra was the lucky one, getting to partner with someone who would carry his name to heights he never could have reached alone." As Timothy rode home under a sky brilliant with stars, he reflected on the journey that had brought him from an unwanted orphan to the respected owner of a thriving ranch. The physical challenges that had once seemed like insurmountable obstacles had become the source of his greatest strengths. The need to think differently had led to innovation. The experience of being dismissed had created empathy for others facing seemingly impossible odds. The ranch that had once belonged to Ezra Blackwood was now unmistakably Timothy's, but it carried forward the values and vision that had made it special in the first place. Under the Blackwood name that Timothy now wore with pride, the operation had become a model for other ranchers and a symbol of what could be achieved when determination met opportunity. Most importantly, the success Timothy had achieved served as proof that society's judgments about human worth were often spectacularly wrong. The lame orphan who supposedly couldn't work had not only mastered the demanding profession of ranching, but had revolutionized it through innovation and strategic thinking. As he approached the lights of his ranch house, Timothy felt the deep satisfaction of a man who had not only fulfilled his own dreams, but had honored the memory and values of the mentor who had made those dreams possible. The Blackwood name would continue to represent excellence in ranching, but now it would also represent something else: the unlimited potential that exists in every person, regardless of their circumstances or apparent limitations. From abandoned orphan to respected rancher, Timothy's incredible journey proves that our greatest limitations often become our greatest strengths. His transformation under the Blackwood name shows that family, success, and legacy are built not by birth but by character, determination, and the courage to see possibility where others see only problems. Subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories of triumph against impossible odds and the power of human potential to overcome any obstacle.